Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of Vertical Stars Podcast 4th season. My loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. This is an amazing episode because David Schwartz boards the mothership to discuss the scores to the good place and a man on the inside. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Schwartz. Thank you for the Vertical Stars Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me here.
It's really my pleasure. It's a great honor to talk with you. As I mentioned off air, I'm a huge fan of The Good Place. I really love A Man on the Inside, and this has been a great honor for me. So I always start off with a question of inspiration. So what inspired your love for music and who are your earliest influences?
Hmm. Well, if you really want to go back, I think I wanted to be a cowboy. And then I found out I didn't do well. I went to horse riding camp, and that was traumatic experience, for many reasons we don't have to go into, but they gave me the big edgy, I was always really tall early on. I'm now average tall, I think, but as a 7 and 8-year-old, I was just really stood out. So they gave me the giant horse. They put me in the bunk with 15-year-olds who were into way different things than 8-year-olds. It was a very small dude ranch camp, and somehow I survived it. Anyway, and I'm not a big horse rider, but the guitar sort of caught on. And then, I think there's a lot of great composers, and I'm certainly the biggest fan of John Williams, but that's the way they come in. They come in from John Williams, or one of the great film composers, or classical music. I saw the Beatles on TV and I said, this is what I want to do. And it had nothing to do with film. I just wanted to be in a band and do that. And that's what I did for many years and toured. And, I think a lot of people get told this, oh, you'd be a great film composer. I don't know why. I didn't even write. I was not a songwriter in any of the bands. I could add a lot to the band. I'm not being falsely modest, but I rarely, if I wrote a piece of music and I would force myself to do it, I would be too perfectionist and said, well, this doesn't sound as good as Stravinsky or Miles Davis or the Beatles. And I would stop, which is not a great way. But strangely, when I had my first show that had real, very serious deadlines, I found out, well, that's not an option. You either do it and do it to everyone's satisfaction or you fail. And I like doing it. So, when I found that, that was big. I think, I know we're going through a lot of little parts of this conversation, but music is just, well, it's a mystery, but it's so fantastic, and I liked all kinds of instruments when I was a kid. I think even before that, I had an aunt who could play the piano, and at my grandmother's house, the piano was there. And the parents would go into the family circle, which was comical, sort of like the movie Avalon. And I'd get bored, so I'd go to the piano. And I was the oldest kid. My next cousin didn't come along for 5 years, so I was sort of like an only kid in the entire family. And my sister wasn't until 7 years later. So I would play the piano, and not with any, I would just sort of make stuff up on the piano, and nobody cared. And she also had an old tennis racket in her closet. So those two things shaped my life. I didn't go on the tennis tour, but but I still play tennis all the time. So and when I told her, she's since passed, I said, you were this big influence in my life. You taught me music and tennis. She'd go, what are you talking? I said, you had a tennis racket in your closet. She said, oh yeah. So, and she was a good piano player, but she was a public school teacher, so she didn't, go into music. I don't think anyone in my family was it. Now there's a lot of people in music in my family who are younger than me, but yeah.
Okay, I'm a teacher as well, so I appreciate that. I appreciate that a
Yeah,
lot.
I have a great deal of respect for your field.
Thank you so much. So, like I said, you are the composer to one of my favorite shows of all time, maybe first or second, probably second, The Good Place, which I find it's one of the people that ask like what show is perfect from beginning to end. I always feel like The Good Place fits that category of it never had a bad episode. It's always just been this wonderful thing. Looking back on The Good Place, what did that show mean to you?
Well, everything. I'd had a first part of my career that was fantastic, that included Northern Exposure and Deadwood and Arrested Development and all kinds of, I've been lucky to work on good stuff, and that's what people ask me, what kind of music do I like to do? And I say good, as opposed to bad. And I feel the same way about shows. And early in my career, I worked with people that weren't easy, or I didn't get it or whatever. But I got a call from my then agent, Sarah Kovacs, called me up a couple of years ago, and this is after The Good Place and everything. But she said, "I'm going to become a doula and not be an agent anymore." So she's no longer an agent, and I'm sure she's as good a doula as she was an agent.
Hmm.
And but anyway, she called me up and says, these guys want to meet you. It's Mike Schur and a bunch of other guys. And I knew there were really big names in TV, but I didn't really know much about that. She says, go over there. So I get in my car and I go over to the valley. It's about 45 minutes, an hour away. And I've told the story before, but I'll give the shorter version of it. But it's like when you have a meeting as a composer, and now, the first time I just thought it was the most intimidating thing. Like they're asking you what you're going to write, what music you're going to write for their show, and you haven't seen the show,
Yeah.
you haven't seen the script, and you're supposed to come up with some genius idea. Oh, like trombones and ukuleles, and that can work. I could never fake it that way. So I would just say, well, I'll write something and you'll see what it's like. But when I got there, there may be 5 or 6 producers, and they're all staring at you, and you're on the couch by yourself, which is just, I've always found that maybe I picked the wrong chair. Maybe I could go in there and just pick a chair and they'd be on the couch, but that doesn't seem better either. So it's a funny dynamic. And that meeting was different than any meeting that I ever had. They only wanted to talk about Deadwood. They wanted stories about David Milch, and I didn't have many. I told them what I did. They seemed to like those stories, and the meeting seemed to be over. I mean, there's some casual back and forth about music and a little bit about what the show was going to be, but it was hard for any of us to describe what the show was going to be.
Hmm.
And one of those producers is still a neighbor of my block, so he just kept on saying, "I'm in the Brown house." I said, "What does that mean?" I said, "Because we live far away from Universal Studios where the meeting was, but he really is like a few houses away." And David Miner is an incredible talent and a great guy. But when Mike was leaving, I'm sure he gave me some examples of what they liked. I think they were listening to some John Bryan and a bunch of other big name composers, and they found it worked, but it didn't work. There were things they liked about it all. And then Mike said, "There's one thing you should know. I don't really care for music in my shows." So, yes. So you don't know what to do. And on the way home, I got a call from Sarah, my agent, who's now the doula. Uh, and she said, they want you to do it. And that just doesn't happen. They meet with other people, they call you back, they don't call you back, a month goes by, and always these days they want you to write a demo. So there were 2 things that were really unusual there. The show was already picked up for a full season,
Hmm.
but the pilot was going to be scrutinized. And, I don't think I can kid myself that if I had not delivered music that they liked in those first couple of weeks, when we were really, there was a lot of great experimentation, which you don't get either. So I was inspired when I got home and I wrote the opening theme, which is over 2 minutes and was longer at the time. And Mike would go and probably in the next 8 or 9 versions of it, each time he goes, yeah, that's got some things we like in it, but like it's not it yet.
Hmm.
And um, from the very beginning, he has a very intelligent way of saying that where you don't feel totally rejected and your hopes are dashed.
Hmm.
He saw what he liked in it and he said it's not there yet. So I just kept on working on it. I think with that piece, I was able, at his suggestion, to combine the 8 tries I made and pick parts of it. And they happened to work because I was in a mode. And I'll add this to it. I think before that, I was doing Arrested Development and Lady Dynamite, 2 shows, which I love the people who do it. I love the music. I love everything about it. But our way of doing it was the kitchen sink. In other words, one minute it could be orchestra, next time it's Polynesian ukuleles, which was a big thing. Then it's all jazz. Then it's scary music. So, we had a lot of fun with that. And I love the fact that I couldn't be pinned down and, people would say, oh, he can do anything. But I secretly longed for the good place because the good place had a palette
Hmm.
that I created and I decided to do that. And they liked the palette. So we had a sound from the first day. And I will say that that first theme and maybe 4 or 5 others ended up being themes in the show, even some of them that were rejected. And I think that always happens. The person who's in charge says, well, nah, this doesn't work. We don't want this.
Hmm.
And in A Man on the Inside, Mike heard, oh, this is all good music. This was before we did one. He says, I don't think the upright bass, it's not right for this kind of spy stuff. And then they were sending me back temps and it had all the upright bass cues that I had in it, which I love because that's my instrument and they're all over this place. But so that was great. And I would have found it challenging to, have to do it on chromatic harmonica or viola. You know, it's just another way of looking at it. Of course, you want your ideas to be instantly adored, but it doesn't always happen that way. And often you don't have a chance for a second idea either. So,
Hmm.
you know, having working with people who are clearly going to work with me and work with each other that way, and that's true of every part of the show. You know, Mike just keeps on refining it and has ideas, and Morgan Sackett is his right-hand person, and Morgan's incredible, has been incredible for me and hired me on a lot of other great projects. But he really brought the idea of A Man on the Inside as a TV series. It had existed as a Chilean documentary, which I haven't seen, and I made a conscious choice not to be influenced by the doc. Now I'm thinking about watching it between, you know, season one and season two now. But I could be influenced by the music, and I'd rather not. If someone told me you should listen to it, I would. But you know, in this case, I chose not to. So, but I hear it's great. I don't know about the music because no one's talked to me about that. But I hear the doc itself. Well, it was nominated for an Oscar. Have you seen it?
No, no, I had. I didn't know there was one.
That was the inspiration, and
Really?
it really came from Morgan. He directed at least the first episode, and you know, and Mike, you know, was so happy that it was coming from Morgan. So
You know, like I said, I want to go hit on A Man on the Inside in a moment. I just have two more questions, if you don't mind, about The Good Place.
go for it.
Um, One thing about The Good Place, and you know, being a fan, and I want, you know, as any fan, what do you want other people to watch your show and love the show that you watch, right? The Good Place, I find hard to define for people. Like, what is it? You know, it's not really. It's sort of it's a comedy, but at the same time, there's this drama. There's all this philosophical, all this stuff inside it. When you're developing the idea, the themes for for the show, how did you determine of what show it was?
That's an excellent question, and I don't know if I have the answer. I think I don't think like this is going to make people feel scared or sad ever. And when I learned that on my first show, Northern Exposure, someone was writing their thesis about it, and I felt so bad answering her answers with like, well, you know, I just wrote it, and then afterwards I might think that.
Yeah.
But there was something about The Good Place, and I agree with you too. It's hard. I couldn't sell it to half of my friends because, well, it's this comedy with Ted Danson, but it's not a comedy, and it takes place in heaven or hell. And gee, Kristen Bell is great, you know, writing really cool music. But it's a very unique show, and I think it will stand the test of time. I think it will become
Hmm.
more popular as it goes on. Because I meet now people who discover it, or they say they watch an episode every night before they go to sleep, and they find it comforting. And there's a lot of things that wouldn't be classified as comforting in it, you know? I
Yeah.
mean, and the big reveal at the end of the first season or the beginning of the second, you know, we didn't know about it. We had an extra meeting that Mike called us up and he said, look, heads up, this is going to happen. So very few people knew about it. And so I couldn't write music with that in mind because
Hmm.
and you know, there's been other reveals in TV show like you figure that's going to happen. I did not have one iota of a clue on that. And it was so cool. And similarly, I think we were all shocked when Mike says, I have a great ending for the show. And I will add shocked and really bummed out. But he was right. You know, I remember going to the table read for that episode and and how good it was and how everyone was crying. And I said to Mike, you know, I would like it to go on for 10 years for selfish reasons, but you know, this is a great ending. It's really beautiful. And not many it's very unusual that he saw you know, he didn't want to get it to a point where it became tedium
Hmm.
or rote for the writers and him. And he really came up with a great ending. And I will
And,
tell you one side story that I was called in to be Ted's guitar teacher. And I wrote this little song with Mike actually. And it's a psychedelic ditty. And then at the end of the show, it's the last full song. And I will just point out it's one of the few times since I was 14 or 15 that I sang lead. But I had the great Gabriel Mann who has worked with me on, you know, he started out working here and he's a great singer. And he said, no, it should be you singing this. You know, I'll double you a little bit, which I kind of felt that was the right thing. It was just that I was, you know, I sort of became my 15-year-old voice again. I don't know how, but you know, I played it to my daughter who's a great singer and she said, no, you should do this and you should make your own album, which I didn't. But the thing with the TED thing, I'm trying to remember this. So I came to the set when they were filming that first that ending episode, and Ted's written a song for. I now I'm trying to remember. he wants to play it to Mary Steenburgen, who's playing his girlfriend when he leaves the good place. I'm not getting this totally right, but in the I showed it. Actually, I think Ted only heard a recording of me playing guitar and singing it. And in the table read, he was supposed to sing it. And when it came up, he just got his points at me. So, and I don't do that. So I had to stand up, and there were a couple hundred people there, I think, and sing, and it went well. And then I got Ted to join in with me, and he did such a great job in the show with that. And I mean, Mary has her own songwriting and singing career, but for Ted, and I got to teach him two instruments. I think in the second there's a fantasy scene in the second season where I teach him my instrument, the upright bass. And it was fun to see him playing those. And he did for a while have an upright bass. He had a goal of performing with Mary, but I don't think it ever got that far.
Hmm.
It's a hard instrument to just pick up, but
Well, I think the great thing about The Good Place is that there's so many layers to the show. There's like this surface silliness to it, but the more you watch, you get this deeper and deeper depth of story and character and emotion. All that kind of builds into it, and then kind of, it's just kind of like how it balances off with itself. When you're thinking again about the show, are you writing within the context of the idea of the show in its entirety, or are you focusing on individual character? Because obviously, this is the main five. Um,
right.
and how are you thinking about that? And adding to that a little bit, at times there's a bit of a minimalistic quality to some of the music, and you focus a lot on the piano. Why was the piano the best way to kind of express all that you were trying to encompass with that show?
Well, I was using a lot of alternative pianos, which had a certain vibe to it, and celestes, and not usually electric pianos. I, I'm a disappointing interview. I got to apologize right now because there's a picture in front of me. You can't see it now because this camera only points this way. And I look at it, and by some miracle, I don't understand. Music comes out. And then I might say, this doesn't fit the show.
Hmm.
Or I might say, oh, this is a really good start. What can we do with this to make it great? So that's the way I work. And I'm not as deep thinking or calculated as you think. That doesn't sound right either. But it's sort of the process, and it's a process. And I'm lucky that I sit in front of this keyboard and something comes out. And very often it's terrible. I go, this sucks. And I'll literally say that out loud sometimes. But then there's something about it that I'll keep on picking at it so that it turns out. And there are things that I just throw away. Everyone does, but that was really it. So um, I don't think that I had themes for every character. But, when Ted was more on the dark side, it would obviously change. And when, uh, oh God, what's the name of the actor? Mark, who plays the judge in The Bad Place.
Oh God, I know what you're talking about. I can't remember the name of the actor
He's
though.
become a friend, and I'm blanking. Mark Evan Jackson is the
Okay,
actor, but he was so good, and it wasn't broad. You could just go and write really, scary music under him. And with scary music in a comedy is never going to be as, you're not trying to
right.
make jump out of their seats. But I always had a fun time with him. And I did his podcast while the show was running, and he's a brilliant guy. He had learned a few of my themes, and he could play them on the piano, which I probably could not do on the spot. But yeah, so and it definitely changed over a timeline as I experimented, as that they were giving me different things, and something that happens in all episodic TV shows, at least the ones I've done. And starting the second season, they've stopped temping with other people's music. They're temping with yours. And that's one of the great arguments. Is that better, easier, or harder and more frustrating? And very often I never got into just a fight with Mike, but he'd go like, oh, we can use this. I really like it. And I said, I don't think so. I don't think it fits there. And he'd go like, well, you're welcome to try something else, but I'm probably going to choose this, which sometimes he did. Very Mike. There was
Yeah.
one noted time that happened, and I lost that one. But I think the majority of the rest of the ones I could say like, well, I think this is better because of this, and that's it. But in the end, you're talking about music. So in this one that I lost, it was the most I've ever seen him stressed. And he said it, this has caused me more anxiety. I said, "Well, that's ridiculous, And I finally just said, look, you have a gut feeling, and it's not like I control what he said, but I did say this. I said, you have a gut feeling and you should go with it, which was not my piece. It was a piece from a movie. And I strongly disagreed that that was the right one, but he had it in his head for much longer. And, if I listen to it now, I'll go, yeah, that's the piece in this scene. It's not wrong or right. It just happens that way.
There,
And
well, the only say there's a moment in A Good Place, which is maybe one of the more famous moments that at least have become famous on YouTube. It's that Chidi the wave returns to the ocean speech. I don't know if you know which one I'm talking about, when it's
yeah,
towards like the end and him and Eleanor are it's like the last time they're gonna be together, and there's
right.
that beautiful music that you're playing. I mean, it really is a beautiful piece. It's sad, it's beautiful, it's so many things in a very short span of music. I mean, I mean, I know, the simple question would be, how did you approach that? I mean, that is such a wonderful moment, and
I'm
it's
going to
so
give you
easy
the
to mess
same.
that up. How did you make it so perfect?
Oh, well, thank you, thank you, thank you. But I think my answer is the same. I just sit there until it feels right to me. So, I can't say I was thinking of major or minor. And I believe if we're talking about the Sankey, I've done a lot of things since The Good Place that are more forward in my memory. That's the way my memory works. But that he was the first to leave, and it was heartbreaking. And I think Chidi's character is the only one who could have done it at that time because he was the one that had no selfish agenda, and that was so beautiful. And I can't remember a character that didn't at the same time seem self-righteous or pompous. He was just Chidi.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, that's something we can throw back at Mike that he came up with those characters. Or here's a question that's not about music, but I think about it all the time and ask showrunners. Like, they don't have very long to cast a show. Sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's a couple of months. But how do they get a perfect cast? And they don't know how the cast is going to work together and get along on stage and off stage. And the great shows all have that. Um, Arrested Development. I'm talking about ones I've done: Northern Exposure, Deadwood, um, Veep, which I only did the last season, but the casts are legendary,
Hmm.
and they got better with every episode. So if you go back and listen to or watch the first episode of much shows, you can see how much they've grown since that first episode. And pilots are always weird and different because usually the pilot's done to get the show picked up. Then they make a lot of changes, and 6 months later it airs, or you
Hmm.
start working on post-production. So I just find that an interesting, like there's some amount of, well, it's obviously skill, but that it can come together that well.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think anyone, I was sort of in when Mitch was casting the cast of Arrested Development. And it was so bizarre. I couldn't get through that script because I said, like, I know this is going to be, because I knew Mitch.
Yeah.
I said, I know this is going to be great when we see it all together, but it was, just like the show's like hard to understand in a way, but then it's just so hysterically funny. And, but there's a moment in that show in the pilot where Michael Schur, George Michael, is, they're sleeping in the upstairs bedroom of the what do they call it? It's a house that they show in a community. It's the one that they show to prospective buyers, and they're just bunking up there because they have no place to live. And they both wake up in this bed on the floor, a mattress. And Bateman says to Michael Cera, he says, "What do I say is the most important thing?" And, and he goes, "Breakfast." And no, Jason Bateman says, "No, family." And he's like annoyed. But then I said, "Oh, this really is a family." That to me cemented it. And it was only a few lines into the pilot that I said, like, yeah, Jason Bateman could be Michael Cera's dad. And the siblings could be siblings, as crazy and as different as they are. And that's, and it's such a different show than The
Hmm.
Good Place. And I got to do both, so I'm very fortunate. And they're two different styles of comedy and drama, and yeah.
Like I said, it really is one of those shows I think just really does feel I feel like at the same time, like you could almost teach an entire class of philosophy just by watching The Good Place, and you kind of get all that, you kind of get absorbed into all of that. And So obviously you do the good place, and then you moved on to A Man on the Inside, which is
Mhm.
obviously by Michael Schur as well. How did he sell the concept to you for that show, and how what did he explain to you that helped you understand how you were going to musically create it?
Um, well, he doesn't have to sell anything to me. I'm in, but when he gets a new show, I don't know if I'm going to be called, but I was very grateful. I'd done In Between Rutherford Falls, which was really great too, and didn't really get the life it deserved. Maybe that'll come back. It was like one of the first scripted shows on the what network? Because of the Peacock. And I couldn't even tell my friends, like it was that thing, oh, I don't want to join another streaming service. So I don't think enough people saw it, but maybe I shouldn't blame the Peacock Network. But he was concerned. I think we all were because the show, how do I say this? It could seem melancholy and sad. Oh,
Hmm.
it's going to be in a senior citizen's home. Does it look really drab? Does it sound really drab? If we're playing to the emotion, is it going to be too sad? But we can't do a lot of broad comedy there. And I don't think at that point we were realizing how good the actors are at
Hmm.
towing that line. You know, Ted is just unbelievable and led the way. And but he said it has a spy element, and he says it has comedy and it has drama, and the trick is going to be where that line is.
Hmm.
I will say that my entire career, because I started later in life at Northern Exposure, it can be, people ask me what kind of music. I don't say this because it sounds pretentious, but I said it's finding the line between comedy and drama.
Hmm.
And when people ask me how I write funny music, I said I try not to, but I try to write fun music.
Hmm.
So, in that people are having a good time and it's fun, and if there's real funny on camera, then it's being supported. And it's not Mickey Mousing everything. I've done those too, and there's a time and place for that. Um, yeah. What was the original question?
Um,
How did Mike talk to us about
right.
and we were talking to everyone in post-production at that time. And yeah, he was concerned about all those things. And it was interesting too, because it was the first time he had a Netflix-based show. And they wanted to test like early on, and a couple of tests. If I'm not positive of the facts here, but we did at least one test during the pilot, and kept testing after that. And so it was a different schedule. Usually, I'd have a lot more time to develop things, and I would start later. But Mike would say, "Well, we could put temp music in there, and your temp music, another temp. That'll be fine. But we think it would be better if you wrote new music." And I said, "Well, I do too. But it just changes the structure of the way we were physically doing it." And again, a lot of those early cues, it always surprises me because I think that they feed them to the editors who are really, really talented. And I'll stop here to say that when I was doing The Good Place, Mike and especially both editors, but Eric Kissick, he was a strong voice and became a producer of the show. So, and this was the case in Lucy and Desi, and it was the case in Pete Rose. Like, it's pretty easy to get the director showrunners, not easy, but I felt like they would be easier and have less notes.
Hmm.
The editors, because they tend to have very detail-oriented minds, because they're editors, would catch all this stuff. And the great majority of the time, I think it made it better. There were
Hmm.
times I would disagree, and then we'd work it out. But they're like often the people as a composer you're answering to the editors, and they're kind of brilliant. I don't know how they do it. Um, so yeah, I think we talked about all those different kinds of music, and then as we did it, one thing that was interesting is there's a number of different main titles because it's delicate. Like the funnier ones, the more fast ones didn't work for every episode. So I think maybe four have different main titles. And then I was on the stage for the last episode, 8, as we finished it, and we got done, and Mike says, I think I want to call it a different show. So it was called The Classic Spy as we worked on it. And then the other title was always there, and Mike and Morgan were going back and forth. But I thought that we were over that, and I had created the main titles. And the week before they had asked that like the three words "a classic spy" that I somehow acknowledged that because it went with the new graphic, which was a new thing. Often the visual part of the main title comes after I write the music, but it can go either way. And so I did it that way, and then suddenly Mike had a new picture waiting, and we all liked it. And then Mike said, "Well, do you think we need to change the music?" And I said, "I don't know," but I could tell he wanted to change it, so we tried it. Me and the music editor, it was sort of a combination of recomposing and editing. We went back, and now I don't hear it. It took me a while to hear that because I had gotten used to the other one, and I do think it's a way better title. But at the
Yeah.
time, again, it was, and it
Well,
is.
well, I like, obviously the title they stuck with has that nice dual meaning, man on the inside and man, inside, and it's brilliant. And I think that was kind of interesting. And I wonder how hard of a landmine was it to walk around. Is that, as you mentioned a little bit, there is a potential that you could go sappy with the music.
Mhm.
There are those, very sad, dramatic moments that could easily fall into sappiness. And there's also comedy that could, if you're not careful, the music can go into a hamminess aspect to it. So was it hard to dance around and focus on getting it just that perfect combination of drama and comedy and not falling to the edges where obviously it could potentially have headed if you weren't careful with it?
Right, and those are two very subjective things. What's funny and what's sappy,
Yeah,
or what's dramatic and what's sappy. Um, I think we had a lot of leeway, but I don't remember a lot of examples of pulling it back because of those reasons. Uh, in that case, often there might be a simpler version of the cue, or we just might play it dry. There's a lot of music in the show, and in the pilot, there was a lot more. I wrote straight the first 2.5 minutes, a cue that I still defending in my mind. No, Mike loved it, and we played it for a few weeks, and then someone came up with the idea with the Cat Stevens song, and it's a great choice. And once I heard that, I go like, well, we don't even have to discuss this. That it solved a lot of problems. It
yeah.
put it in the time that it came from, that songs, which I believe is the late 70s, and it made Ted's timeline. And even though it has great emotion, I'm talking about the song now, the Cat Stevens song,
Hmm.
has great emotion, it's just so classic that it doesn't get melancholy.
Hmm.
I would say it does get melancholy, but people just like that melancholy, and it brings up a nostalgia that works. So that same piece that I wrote is used throughout the first episode, but just in little bits and bots there,
Hmm.
and to the point of where, like, when I first heard it back at the premiere, I go like, oh, I did write a lot of music here. I sort of concentrated on the one that got away. And I knew I wrote a lot of music, but that to me was the theme that I built everything else on. But now that theme was in its entirety was removed, but it's still a big part of it. And it's something that Mike works on at every stage. Are we funny enough? Are we not too schmaltzy, whatever? And it's what I do with the players because I had two or three players come in for most of the episodes, and they're incredible, the best of the very best. And I could say, well, let's try this, and there would be written stuff, but there was also enough time to let them do what they do. And I can't, I mean, I can, but they make it better is a better way to say it, because I'll have an idea and they'll build on it, and they have incredible sounds, and this show has a lot of those sounds. Zach Ray and Larry Goldings on keyboards. I think Zach was available more, but they're both anytime I can work with either of those guys. And the great George Deering, who I've worked with my entire career. And I can't tell you how much he adds, not just to my music, but to, Tom Newman's and John Williams and every composer. Like, and it's weird. We all depend on him. And that sounds really terrible for other guitarists, but there are times like he's in with Tom in London at Abbey Road, and I get to use other guitarists who are great. I just have a shorthand with him, with George, that's, very special to me. And he's worked with my daughter. So, it goes generations, and how he keeps doing it. Well, I'll say this, for all those composers and tons of records, he sounds different with every person.
Hmm.
Which is, I think if I played bass on all those records and I had freedom, I wasn't just reading Tom Newman's charts, I think I would tend to sound like myself. But he has this gift of really, and I've never seen anyone watch the screen like George. Even here in my studio, he can read, play anything, and really know what's going on and help the picture. And in the accelerated schedule of a TV score, you're not going to get a lot of takes at something, even when it's just a small group here. And when I do orchestras, and it does happen, uh, the contractor will say, "Oh, did you really want George Deering? Because we don't really have much guitar in the score." I said, "He will earn his way." It's just amazing. Like with all like for the Lucy and Desi score, where I had my absolute favorite string players in LA, and we'd go to the take and we'd play something, and George says, "Oh, in bar 37, one of the violas was playing F sharp, and it should have been F natural." And every one of those violinists can do that, but George is the quickest at that, and he's in the booth. He's not out on the floor, so it's always uncanny what he can add. And
Hmm.
he just and that thing because there wasn't time, and I didn't really see Lucy and Desi's guitar thing except for some of the Cuban stuff. Um, he really was making up extra parts that we'd be mixing. I go, "Oh, what's that? That's really cool. Make that louder." And it's like this wonderful Easter egg surprise that you'd get there. You have to, if you haven't, you have to meet George Deering.
I'd be very happy if everyone to have him come on the show. That'd be fantastic for me. I'd be honored to speak to the gentleman.
This
Um,
is one of our great discussions because people have asked me about, they call it my guitar playing. I said, it's not, it's usually George. And I'll say, this person wants to interview you for Guitar Magazine. And he goes like, "Well, why would they want to talk to me?" I said, they talk to everybody and you're the most. And he did agree because he knows about Rick Beato. Am I saying his name right? Is it Beato or Beato? Do you know who I'm talking about? He's probably the
um,
biggest pop music podcast. Anyway, but I think because he did Tom Newman and people like um, Brad Mehldau, big jazz, and George knew of that, and he said, "Well, if he really wants to talk to me, he can." And then it never went any further. That's probably on me. I didn't because I don't know his how to get in touch with this guy. But
well, like I said, I'd always be happy to talk to talented people, especially people involved with
I will
with
I
music
will
music.
push him as far as he can be pushed. He's so humble. It's hard to believe.
Well,
And busy.
apart of, go
and
ahead.
and busy. He's more busy than he is humble, because he works 7 days a week,
Hmm.
every day of the year, all holidays. I mean, sometimes he'll in the last 5 or 6 years, he's spending holidays with his family more and stuff like that. And his anyway, we'll go off that subject because I don't
All
want
right,
to
no
put.
worries, no worries. Sort of like The Good Place has that great moment of um, the wave returns to the ocean.
Mhm.
On the Inside has that episode with Gladys, which is so wonderful. It's brilliant. How how did you approach that? Because once again, it is a sadder episode, a little more, it's almost heart-wrenching that episode. So how did you approach composing the pieces for that one?
Um, yeah, I think some of the same problems that The Good Place has in a totally different way. A Modi, as which we call a man on the inside. Now a Modi too is going to get pretty clumsy. The Yeah, we had to be really careful. I'm trying to remember about that episode. But she did a great performance, and I don't remember there being that much music. But in the end, there were 3 or 4 cues that had been temped with the saddest music of The Good Place, and there might have even been one. And this almost never happens in TV. When Mike said, "Can we use it?" I said, "It's fine with me," but the network usually says no for reasons we don't have to get into. But and we used one, and then the other two I wrote, and I just found myself going I would check myself. Is this too much of a weeper? Is it too much of a tearjerker? And I would pull it back. And it's easier to go in the broader direction, and and then it's not too hard to pull back. Oh, this note is too much. What if we
Hmm.
don't have a minor third here and we just make it a fourth? That the kind of thing. Um, and again, when you explain this show, I mean, Darcy Carden said it, and I'm not even paraphrasing, but she was the moderator for the premiere. And it was so great to see her there. She's just an amazing person and brilliant. And she said, well, I told a lot of people they should watch this, but I have to tell them in the last few episodes they're going to be crying. Then they go like, no, we're not. And they said, yeah, they are. And that to start out as a comedy and get people crying in the best sense of it, that you're really going to feel something deep and probably call your mother at the end of the episode. Uh, I think that's really it. Musically, I think it was pretty subtle from what I remembered. We never had big strings, little strings, and yeah. So there were some themes that I came back to. I think that original theme that I talked about that became Cat Stevens didn't become Cat Stevens, but let's say it was replaced by Mr.
Hmm.
Stevens. Um, that theme came back there in a really nice way, and it had a clarinet, which fits a lot of the characters in the show. And there's very little, if you listen, there's just a few notes of clarinet here and there. But it's such a wonderful instrument. I think it can work for everything. It's underplayed. I used a lot of clarinet, and even though the theme on Northern Exposure was a chromatic harmonica, which is really a great instrument, but sticks out, the clarinet has the ability to stay tucked in or tick and create great emotion. It's a single line instrument that's just fantastic. And there's some great clarinet players in town. I
And
think that was Bob Shepard who played that clarinet.
well, like I said, it was brilliant. And like I said, when you're thinking about again with musically with Charles, how did you determine his nature? Because he obviously this humor, the inner sadness. There's that you're actually got to play up actually the spy aspect of him as well. There's a lot of little stuff to play with him. Was there an aspect of him that you really wanted to key in on?
I got to give all that credit to him. Like, I think we all forgot, but we knew how good he was. But like the glee he got from being a detective, that was just a bonus. So it made the detective music more fun and not so tense. And we probably pushed that back and forth just internally here, me and Scott, who works with me and wrote some music, um, and engineered it and mixed. So yeah, and that glee and his ability to go for real depth, in with his grandkids, who are wonderful comic relief, but also they were deep. Those kids were great.
Hmm.
And everyone talks about when they call their mom bro, and I think in the last few years everyone sort of experienced that. And those three young men, well, again, like I talked to them, I met them for the first time at the premiere. And I said, none of you are related, right? And they said, no, we just met, when we started the show. And they just seemed like a family.
Hmm.
So Ted's daughter and her husband, who was, oh God, what was his name in The Good Place? Her husband has a totally different character. He's like a Florida uh,
Oh,
something boy.
a pill boy. He's pill boy on
Pillboy,
the
Pillboy is now
show. Yeah.
this totally straight, loving dad who has, comedy. Yeah, it took us a minute. I think it was Scott who said, "That's Pillboy." And there again, like Mike will cast somebody who he knows is just good and knows that they have range that they can do different things, where it's so easy, especially in what I do, like you're the guy who does uh, single camera comedies or something. And I've been lucky to do different stuff all the time.
But mentioned early, yesterday they announced a Man for on the Inside got not nominated, sorry, got renewed for season two, which
Yep.
is awesome because I look forward to watching it. Like, what is your next project that you're working on?
Well, I'm working on a pilot right in front of me now that's animated, which is really fun because I don't get to do that. It's really wacky, edgy, and weirdly, it takes place in a senior citizen. So I didn't. It took me a while to like I become the guy to call, but it is very different kind of. It's sort of like they're retired at a retirement home where they just go crazy all the time. It's I don't know if I can say it. It's drugs and sex, but they're very funny and they're really great character actors and the voices. And we're just doing a presentation pilot for Disney Fox now. And I don't believe the jobs that I'm doing because they're so cool, but they sound unbelievable. I'm doing the Crosby, Stills, Nash, and sometimes Young doc.
Wow.
Um, and the director is none other than Robert Zemeckis. Now you can ask me if I've ever met Robert Zemeckis. Zemeckis, I will say not yet, but I've been watching some of his films. We watched Contact. My family and I watched Contact. What
Mm.
a great film and what a great filmmaker. And you know, it's different both for directing as a composer. Like I kept on telling the producers who really wanted me to do this, and one who didn't. And he agreed with me. I said, "You don't really need a composer." And this one guy said, "Yeah, that's what I've been telling him." I said, "So the the Mark Monroe, who directed Pete Rose and was a writer and won an Emmy for Lucy and Desi, said, 'Can you try to write a couple of cues for it, and we'll use it to convince the other guys?'" And everyone came around. And the music I wrote, it's not gigantic. And you know, someone asked me, "What are you going to do for the main title?" I said, "I'm not going to have the main title. It's going to be a great Crosby, Stills, and Nash, you know, song, and
Mm.
that's the thing." I will add one other thing that they sent me the footage for it, and it's incredible. I saw the first hour, and now I have the second hour. I have to watch it this weekend, or maybe after I get back from New York. But anyway, it's so good, the doc, and so they found a couple of places where they wanted score as a contrast to the unbelievably, you know, I forget, and I think most people forget how good that band was when they got together, and
Mm.
the magic of those voices together. But it opens up not the beginning of their career. It opens up the film in a pivotal moment. It's the No Nukes concert in New York. And I'm looking at it like I said, wait, I was there. I played with John Hall on that same stage. So I searched through YouTube, and there's a video of me on stage with John Hall. But what I didn't, I'm sure I was aware of it at the time, but I forgot that Graham Nash was singing background with us. You know, he
Yeah.
just walked over from the Crosby, Stills, Nash stage or whatever. And so I said that to the producers, wondering if they'd like it or not. But they did. They were sharing it with themselves. Like, oh, we got the right guy. He was there, you know.
Mm.
And that was a pivotal moment for me as a player. You know, I was playing in Madison Square Garden in New York, and with, you know, I wasn't one of those people, but you know, Springsteen and Bonnie Raitt and Jackson Brown, everyone in music at that time, Chaka Khan. I think Paul Simon walked in and asked, "Can I go on?" You know, and everyone said, "Of course." But then I thought my next smart move was to move 3,000 miles away and start over again. It wasn't a smart move. It took me a long time. I don't think I ever got to that level as a player again.
Mm.
But, you know, composing started to come in. It took a while, you know, and I didn't know I wanted to be a composer, and then I did, and then
Mm.
it still took a while.
Whenever that's ready to come out, please come back on the show and talk about it.
Oh,
Mr.
it'd be
Schwartz,
great.
you've been an absolute pleasure to talk with, sir. I really appreciate it. And like I said, he scoring some of my favorite shows on TV. It been meant a lot to talk with you, sir.
Well, thank you so much. You ask great questions, and I count myself really fortunate to do the shows that I've done. And I think they match me in some way that you
Mhm.
can't, I can't plan my career. I don't know what's coming next or if it's over. And but I'm grateful for what I've had. So again, great talking to you.
Thanks very much, sir. Have a very good night. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Spurs and Stars podcast. Please like and subscribe. Return for the next episode when James Palmiotti returns to the mothership to discuss Deadly Tales of the Gunslinger from Image Comics. For the next voyage, travel on.